and welcome. My name is Hannah Perlmutter, and we are here with Sheldon Schwartz, who is the Democratic candidate for representative in Congress. Thank you for participating. Next, we will review the format of the interview. This will be a live-to-tape interview. That means no edits once we begin. There is no pre-screening of the questions, and answers will be limited to 2 minutes each. We will start with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate, and after the questions, we will conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. Mr. Schwartz, you have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a doctor from Lexington. I practiced for 43 years, and I'm running for Congress in the 5th Congressional District. I'm running because I think Washington is broken, and we need a different type of person representing the district. We need somebody who's not a knee-jerk Democrat, somebody who's willing to reach across the aisle, and somebody with a totally different skill set. I have expertise in healthcare policy, medical economics, and I believe we need somebody there who can ensure health care for everyone, work to ensure health care for everyone, improve the Affordable Care Act, modify and strengthen Social Security and Medicare so it's there for future generations, make sure that we get more bang for the buck in Washington, and that we have much more transparency. I believe that the current incumbent is limited in her scope, and that the district deserves much better.
Great. We will now proceed to the questions. You have up to 2 minutes to answer each question. What are the biggest issues facing the U.S. economy, and what policy priorities would you support to address them?
I think that the biggest priority is, one, to get health care under control. Health care represents about 21% of the gross national product. Health care has a tremendous amount of built-in inefficiencies, and we need to take care of that issue because that impacts on how every American lives, and it also impacts on the health of almost every American business. There are many other aspects of the health and the economy. In my website, which goes into great detail on all the issues, I go into a lot of discussions of how we can improve the economy, both directly and indirectly. But to me, the most important things are we have to make sure that the middle class is able to exist and thrive, and the tax system has to be modified to allow that to happen. In addition, we need to make sure that corporations and wealthier Americans pay their fair share. A big issue right now is tax inversion, companies fleeing this country, moving their headquarters, being able to do business in this country, yet not paying their fair share of taxes. It's hurting us in the short run, but mostly in the long run, and that significantly has to be modified. Another economic issue, which people may not assume is economic, is our educational issue. And what we really need to do is make sure that people get quality educations so that our country is competitive in the future. And as it stands now, we're losing ground to other countries. And in the long run, that's going to come back to bite us. We also need to amend, to improve, to strengthen both Social Security and Medicare so that Americans are able to function economically stably in the future and not find these programs to be wanting as they grow older.
Great. So what would you do about individuals without proper documentation in Massachusetts? What are the responsibilities of the state, of the U.S. government, the individuals themselves, and the countries from which they come?
As far as immigration, I really think this is, first of all, fundamentally to me not a state issue. It's really a federal issue. The people that are here are living in the shadows, living on the margins. That's not good to the state or city or town where they live. That's not good for them. They're taken advantage of. They don't get licenses. They expose the other citizens to problems. What I have been advocating is a compromise, which I actually think Democrats and Republicans could both adopt. The Republicans are petrified of us giving citizenship and voting rights to 7, 8, 9 million Hispanics, because if they do that, what's going to happen is a lot of blue states or purple states are going to turn blue. I believe that what we have to do is give every adult who's not a felon or has a history of violence that came into this country a green card. They can become citizens in one sense, but because they came as adults illegally, they can't vote. If they want to vote, they have to get to the back of the line and go through the proper process. Their children, on the other hand, came age 5, age 7, age 9. They had no choice. A 5-year-old doesn't say, Mommy, I'm going to stay in Honduras when you go to America. Those people should be given citizenship. There are probably 1 million to 2 million of them. Yes, those people will vote for the Democrats. It won't impact on the Republicans right away, and they'll have time to appeal to these people and hopefully contest for their vote. I believe that we have to definitely have a strong border. I used to live in Europe, and we're the only major country in the world who doesn't know who's coming into our country. And we can't just, as Democrats, pay lip service, because the Republicans know we're paying lip service, and then they can argue that they don't have to talk about the other issue of what our responsibility is to these people.
All right, so what roles and responsibilities do federal, state, and local entities have in addressing U.S. energy policy? Are there circumstances in which federal policy should supersede state and local concerns?
Again, I tend to be more of a federalist. I believe fundamentally we have to have a policy strategy, or a energy policy strategy. And we have to be moving towards more renewables and alternative fuels. The best way to do that is to create an equal playing field which takes into account pollution or other costs of producing energy and using energy. States need to compete, and Massachusetts is doing very well, and I saw they were like 6th in the country or 8th in the country. That's going to help us in the long run, both to create jobs in that industry and convert our energy from being dependent on carbon-based fuels to something else. But by and large, we need an energy strategy because we as a country benefit from importing less fuel and using cleaner fuels. I don't see it as being that much a state issue, other than states from a business point of view should be trying to grab as much of the dollar as they can and develop the industries that they want to grab. But it's really a federal issue because energy doesn't stop on one border versus the other. When you talk about things like the Keystone Pipeline or fracking or wind farms, these are things which don't obey boundaries. They're really national in scope. And since they're economic in scope, and many of them are controlled by private industries, they're really a national debate that has to be had.
Great. Do you support or oppose the ongoing expansion of government surveillance and collection of telephone and electronic communications in America? Can you explain your reasoning?
Well, I'm a longstanding member of the ACLU. As somebody who believes very clearly in human rights and citizens' rights, I believe that the only time the government should be snooping on citizens should be if there really is a specific cause that could be defended in a court of law. I don't think a generic dragnet should exist, and therefore I'm very much in favor of strengthening the civil liberties of each of us. The average American has honestly nothing to fear from the government looking over the shoulder, because the average American is really law-abiding and doing everything they want. But I think it gives the wrong impression. We're a free, independent country, and why are they monitoring our phone communications or our cell phones or listening to conversations in public spaces? Unlike my opponent, I would have voted for the FISA compromise that the president proposed. She voted against the entire compromise. Many Democrats voted for the compromise to allow it to occur. And then I would have said at the end, now we have more to do. I believe that you can't allow perfection to be the enemy of the good, and you have to be able to move the ball forward on the field, and half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. If her vote had prevailed, we wouldn't have improved the problem whatsoever. I do believe the ultimate goal is to try to have communication without government surveillance.
Right. What principles should drive U.S. foreign policy, and how would you prioritize these principles in practice?
That's a very complex question. I think America, unfortunately, needs to be involved in many areas that other countries don't feel that they have to be involved. And that's because of the military power that we have. There's no way that we can withdraw, because whenever we don't get involved, we create a vacuum. A perfect example, regardless where you are on the issue, is by not getting involved in Syria, we caused a vacuum to occur, and then other forces take over. So unfortunately, America can't withdraw. Whether or not we should be quote unquote a policeman for the world is a matter of how you define the word policeman. But America, unfortunately, is condemned to participate as the world's global superpower. Having said that, I think that we need to project our real ideals. And to the greater part, even though we need to deal with dictatorships like the totalitarian system in China, or we have to deal with quasi-democratic countries like Egypt, or countries where maybe the elections weren't all that clean, like the next Afghanistan, or questions in Turkey, we don't have the right to pick and choose who we deal with. There is one principle that I'm strongly in favor of, and that is we have to end the embargo with Cuba. It's nonsense. If we're dealing with Korea, if we're dealing with China, who are definitely questionable regimes, then how can we not deal with an island nation 90 miles off the coast? But I do believe that we just have to try to project our values of democracy, of openness, of competition, and we have to hope as much as possible that we can follow our principles and not political games. Unfortunately, diplomacy is not what we see, but what is going on behind the scenes. And so a lot of what's done in our name is probably not what I as a citizen totally would like. But I believe that we have to have standards.
Great. So what should the U.S. government's role be in influencing international capital markets and expanding exports of U.S. goods and services?
We need to be transparent. We need to insist that all of our economics and the economics of other countries are totally transparent and that everybody plays by the rules. I've grown up through the era of Japan cheating us and Korea cheating us, and now the BRIC nations, Brazil and Russia and India cheating us, and all modifying markets to their own advantage. The C is China. We need to insist that the WTO and other principles are fulfilled. There's no dumping. The game is paid fairly. Now, there are certain countries in the third world which need help, and they can't play by the same rules. But countries that are capable, that are developed, that have high standards of living, they need to play by the rules. And then I think what you do is have the best person win, the best company win, the best technology win. Protectionism doesn't really help anyone. And America needs to fight for its industries and for its workers. And therefore, when you get to the big question of this trade agreement that's being worked out, especially with the Asian nations, I think it needs to be debated by Congress. I think it needs to be had a public discussion, and we shouldn't run into things. We shouldn't run into matters where the other nation doesn't protect its workers or doesn't protect the environment. Our companies are at a disadvantage, and they do. We have to look at the total cost of trade policy and try to make it fair, balanced, and like I said, have the best person or company win, or the corporation or country. Great.
So does the U.S. government have a role in bridging the achievement gap? And can you please give us some specific reasons why?
Achievement gap in education.
Yep.
The government has a role. Unfortunately, in this country, I say unfortunately, it's good for Massachusetts, but unfortunately, education is local. And a lot of people think they understand, just like in medicine or anything else, what's good for them, and they don't. You need the professionals in education to talk about the professional issues. I'm a scientist. I believe that everything should be data-driven and it should be outcomes analyzed. My son-in-law is a PhD in educational policy at the University of Pittsburgh, so we have many a discussion. The federal government should find the systems that work and promote them. We live in Massachusetts. MCAS is considered to be the best test, bar none, in the entire country. Many of these other states create testing which actually makes the students look like they're doing better, but the real test results would show that they're not improving. But that's for political reasons. The federal government should try to set standards, give incentives for people to reach those standards. the federal budget, I think, in education is only 12% of the total cost of education. So it still comes down to local issues. And what we need to do is educate the educators so that superintendents and people become more informed of what's really going on so that they can improve systems. And then we really have to have fair testing. We have to know who's succeeding and who's failing, not to punish them, but to say to Alabama, do you know that Maine is doing better than you? Or to say to Idaho, do you know Massachusetts is doing better? If they choose to leave their education the same, there's a broader issue. Should any American child not be able to get a quality education? Unfortunately, I used to live in Texas. The politics of education is so intense, I don't see in the short term how the federal government's going to impose outcomes on state governments.
Right. What strategies would you use for working with members of other parties and with others of opposing views? What experience do you have in implementing these strategies?
Well, as I said in my 1-minute statement, hopefully looking in the right camera, you need to have a, could you rephrase the question?
Sure. What are strategies you've used in the past or you plan on using with dealing with people of other parties who may have opposing ideas than you?
Like I said at the initial aspect, Democrats are in the minority. Democrats only have, will be in the minority for at least 6 years in the Congress, the House of Representatives. And if one projects going forward, they probably will be for 16 years. When you're in the minority, you have to talk to the majority because the majority has the ability to vote you down every time. What we really, really need is to reach across the aisle. We need to come in with firm ideas. I liken myself to the next Barney Frank. I'm opinionated, I'm not intimidated, I'm outspoken, I understand what I believe and how I got those ideas. On the other hand, I believe that I have to sit down and do something which no politician wants to admit they're doing, which is compromise. Because I'm trying to move the ball in my direction. Being in the minority, I'm not going to get all. I hope to get some. I don't want to have none. Therefore, I have to reach across. I have to have a civil discussion. I have to talk. I have to try to sell my points, find areas of common interest, and the discussion hopefully will move in a direction that's relatively non-ideologic, and incrementally we can get some change. My problem is that too many of the people, including the person I'm running against, tend to be more knee-jerk, what I call knee-jerk Democrat, and they balance off the knee-jerk Republicans, and they basically have decided they're not going to have a discussion. By no discussion, we keep moving. My ideas, or my feeling is that if we don't move forward, we're really moving backward.
Right. So can you please give us one example of an issue that you and your opponent agree on, and then 2 examples of an issue in which you differ, and why your positions represent the best interests of the 5th Congressional District?
An issue we agree on is gun violence. We both agree on it. The subtitle of why we disagree on it is I don't really spend a lot of time talking about it because it's unattainable. My opponent talks about it and makes people feel that she's a great advocate of it, but the truth is nothing is going to change in this country for the next 6 to 16 years. We can't even get Democrats in the Senate to vote for gun control, let alone Republicans. So I've chosen to focus on what I call real rather than unreal. We don't have major disagreements. I would say the biggest difference with my opponent is that she's more or less a one-trick pony, and she really talks about women's issues to the exclusion of everything else. Everything is child issues, women issues. I worked for Planned Parenthood in the 60s before Roe versus Wade. I joked that I worked for Planned Parenthood before she was born. She was probably 5 or 6 years old. I think that a man can represent women's views absolutely perfectly. I have a wife of 45 years. I have a daughter. I have 5 granddaughters. All my daughter-in-laws and my daughter have graduate degrees. I believe in total women's equality, total reproductive rights. But it's not that we disagree. My opponent just doesn't discuss things. She's not focusing on taxation. She's not focusing on how to strengthen Medicare and Social Security. She's not talking about health care. She's not talking about the Affordable Care Act. She's not talking about how to get more bang for the buck. There's a void. Silence. And it's not a matter of difference. Am I a Democrat? Yes. Do I line up with most of the policy ideas? Yes, except party ideas. The party doesn't have good policies to often get from point A to point B. I think what I bring to the table is a way to get from point A to point B, not just agreeing on something. You just can't believe that you want the sky to be blue and a rainbow to be there in the morning. If you want to achieve that, you got to figure out how are you going to get there. And my opponent has no way to get from A to B.
Great, thank you. So Mr. Schwartz, you have now 1 minute for a closing statement.
Thank you. You've heard some of my ideas. Unlike my opponent and many Democrats in Congress, believe that you need to reach across the aisle, that you need to not be a knee-jerk Democrat, and you have to work for the betterment of your constituency. I believe that I bring a skill set that's much broader and much more informed than my opponent. Change is a difficult thing. Everybody says they don't like the current Congress and they don't like their current congressperson. But when somebody offers somebody real change, people actually are appalled. Can I vote against the incumbent? Am I doing something that makes me feel uncomfortable? I basically suggest that if you had a doctor who served for 8 months for you, and you had a second doctor come along who was much better, would you keep your old doctor for another 2 years, or would you switch to the new doctor? I would argue you need to switch to the new doctor. Vote for me on September 9th for real change in the state of Massachusetts.
Great, thank you. So we want to thank Mr. Schwartz for participating in our conversation. Please make your voice count by voting at the state primary on September 9th of 2014. For Arlington Public News, this is Hannah Perlmutter. Thank you.